January 1942. The North Atlantic looked empty on maps. In reality, it was the most important battlefield on Earth. Every week hundreds of merchant ships crossed freezing black water carrying fuel, grain, ammunition, medicine, and food toward Britain. Without them the country starved. Without them the factories stopped. Without them the war ended. German submarines understood this perfectly. Inside Derby House in Liverpool, officers tracked convoy routes across giant wall charts while casualty reports arrived constantly. Another convoy attacked. Another tanker burning. Another cargo ship gone beneath the Atlantic. Churchill later admitted the Battle of the Atlantic was the only thing during the war that truly frightened him. Because for a time, the ocean itself seemed to belong to Germany. Able seaman Thomas Hargreaves stood aboard the freighter Empire Falcon staring into darkness so complete it erased the horizon. No lights were allowed. 40 merchant ships moved blindly through winter seas while destroyers supposedly guarded them somewhere nearby. Thomas had already watched 3 ships sink that winter. The first vanished almost instantly after a torpedo exploded beneath the hull. The second burned for 14 hours before disappearing. The third carried Canadian food supplies. Thomas remembered apples floating across freezing water beside drowning sailors. At night the convoy felt haunted. You never saw the submarines. You only saw the result. Captain Lieutenant Ernst Keller watched the convoy through binoculars from the bridge of U-96. Moonlight reflected faintly across wet steel while columns of merchant ships moved slowly through darkness ahead of him. The British still did not understand. Their escorts searched outward away from the convoy after every attack. Keller smiled. They were hunting the wrong ocean. Full ahead, he ordered. The submarine slipped directly between convoy columns on the surface using darkness and speed rather than stealth underwater approaches. One cargo ship passed so close Keller could hear machinery vibrating inside its hull. He selected targets calmly. Tanker first. Then ammunition ship. 2 torpedoes launched. Minutes later the night exploded orange while destroyers charged outward searching empty water beyond the convoy perimeter. Exactly as expected. Far away in Liverpool, Captain Gilbert Roberts coughed blood into a handkerchief inside Derby House. Tuberculosis had ended his sea career. Now Churchill wanted him to solve the Atlantic crisis from shore. Most senior officers considered the assignment absurd. Roberts ignored them. He created the Western Approaches Tactical Unit, WATU. The room looked more like a classroom than a command center. A giant floor map covered with chalk markings. Wooden ship models pushed around by young women from the Women's Royal Naval Service using long sticks. No medals. No combat experience. Which Roberts suspected might actually help. Janet O'Kell was 20 years old and had never seen combat. What she possessed instead was distance from naval tradition. While senior officers relied on instinct and experience, Janet treated convoy attacks like mathematical problems involving speed, angles, timing, and visibility. Night after night WATU reconstructed real convoy battles using official reports. Every torpedo strike. Every escort movement. Every submarine sighting. Most reports ended identically. Submarine escaped. Janet noticed something strange. The escort destroyers always rushed outward after attacks, yet ships near the convoy center kept getting hit. It made no sense. Unless the submarines were already inside. She stopped moving her model ship. "Sir," she said quietly. "What if the submarine was already in the convoy?" The room went silent. Roberts replayed convoy HG-76 from beginning to end. 48 merchant ships. 3 confirmed U-boats. Exact escort positions. Then the geometry collapsed. One merchant ship near the center physically could not have been hit from outside the formation. Roberts immediately telephoned Admiral Max Horton. In the last war, Roberts asked, "Would you ever enter a convoy to attack?" Horton answered instantly. "Of course. It's the only effective way." Everything suddenly aligned. The U-boats were not wolves circling outside the flock. They were wolves moving among the sheep. Commander David Llewellyn hated convoy duty. Weeks passed soaked, freezing, exhausted, and waiting for explosions you could not prevent. Then Derby House sent new tactical instructions. When attacked, illuminate the convoy. Search inward first. Assume the submarine is already inside. Most captains doubted the idea. Then a torpedo struck near the convoy center. Instead of charging outward, Llewellyn followed the new doctrine. Star shells exploded overhead, flooding the convoy with white light. For one impossible second he saw it clearly. A surfaced U-boat between the merchant ships. Close enough to touch. Hard to port. Fire. The destroyer accelerated directly toward the submarine while other escorts blocked escape routes exactly as WATU instructed. The U-boat crash-dived. Depth charges followed seconds later. The Atlantic detonated beneath the convoy. Oil surfaced first. Then wreckage. For the first time in months, the hunters had become the hunted. At first Admiral Max Horton despised WATU. He considered it a game designed by shore officers and girls who had never experienced naval combat. Then Roberts invited him to Liverpool. Horton agreed to command the U-boats during 5 tactical exercises. He lost every single game. Furious, he demanded to know who controlled the escorts. The screen separating players came down. Janet O'Kell stood there quietly holding her plotting stick. 20 years old. Never been to sea. Horton stared silently for several seconds before ordering WATU tactics distributed across the Royal Navy immediately. May 1943 became catastrophic for Germany's submarine force. Convoys that once died helplessly now fought back aggressively with coordination and speed. Star shells illuminated submarines trapped between merchant ships while escort destroyers attacked instantly instead of chasing imaginary threats into darkness. The Atlantic itself seemed to turn against the U-boats. Germany lost 41 submarines during May alone. Entire experienced crews vanished beneath freezing water. Admiral Karl Donitz called it Schwarzer Mai, Black May. For the first time in the war, submarine losses became impossible to replace. On May 24, 1943, Donitz withdrew the wolf packs from the North Atlantic. The longest battle of the war had effectively been decided. Inside U-584, sonar operator Lucas Weber listened through headphones while destroyer propellers thundered nearby. Too close. The British escorts behaved differently now. Faster reactions. Better coordination. No hesitation. As if they somehow knew exactly where submarines hid. The captain ordered silent running. Then came the explosions. Depth charges hammered the hull. Lights burst overhead while dust filled the submarine. Another detonation bent the deck beneath Lucas's feet. Men screamed somewhere in the engine room. Steel creaked under enormous ocean pressure. Lucas finally understood what many U-boat crews realized too late in 1943. The Atlantic no longer belonged to them. The Battle of the Atlantic was not won by one admiral or one ship. Part of it was won inside a room in Liverpool covered with chalk lines and wooden models by people the Navy initially dismissed completely. The Allies always possessed courage, ships, and manpower. What they lacked was perspective. For over a year they searched outward into darkness for an enemy already inside the formation. And somewhere beneath the Atlantic today, merchant ships, destroyers, submarines, and thousands of sailors still rest together in silence beneath. The success of WATU spread quietly at first. Escort captains who once dismissed the new tactics as classroom theory suddenly reported something extraordinary during convoy operations. The submarines were no longer invisible. Destroyers began catching U-boats surfaced between merchant columns at night. Radar operators identified contacts exactly where WATU predicted submarines would appear. Convoys that previously dissolved into chaos under attack now maintained formation while escorts counterattacked with precision. The psychological effect mattered as much as the tactical one. For months German commanders had hunted merchant convoys with confidence bordering on routine. Now every surfaced attack carried enormous risk. Every convoy might suddenly illuminate the darkness with star shells and reveal a submarine trapped among ships with nowhere to escape. Captain Lieutenant Ernst Keller experienced this transformation personally during a later Atlantic patrol. His submarine surfaced beside another convoy shortly after midnight. Conditions appeared perfect. Heavy clouds covered the moon while rough seas reduced visibility. Exactly the sort of weather U-boat commanders preferred. Keller guided the submarine carefully between merchant columns just as he had done dozens of times before. Diesel engines vibrated beneath the hull while cargo ships loomed like dark buildings around him. Then the night exploded white. Star shells burst overhead without warning. The convoy illuminated instantly. Keller froze. Destroyers were already turning inward directly toward him. Not searching. Not guessing. Hunting. They know, someone whispered inside the control tower. The escorts opened fire immediately. Tracers slashed across darkness while Keller ordered an emergency crash dive. Crewmen scrambled below deck as shells struck seawater around the submarine. U-96 plunged beneath the Atlantic only seconds ahead of destruction. But the British destroyers stayed directly overhead. Waiting. Inside the submarine, alarm bells screamed while crewmen sealed watertight compartments. The electric motors replaced diesel engines with an eerie mechanical hum as U-96 descended deeper into darkness. Then the depth charges arrived. The first explosions sounded distant. The second detonated close enough to shake the entire submarine violently sideways. Light bulbs shattered overhead while dust burst from pipes and valves. Another explosion followed immediately. Then another. The British escorts no longer dropped charges randomly hoping for luck. They attacked with terrifying precision, predicting submarine movement almost perfectly. Keller gripped the periscope housing while calculations raced through his head. Course changes. Depth changes. Silent running. Nothing worked. The destroyers stayed above them relentlessly. Each detonation bent steel inward with horrible groaning sounds. Crewmen stared silently at the hull as if expecting the ocean itself to burst through the walls at any second. One sailor crossed himself quietly. Another vomited into a bucket from stress and fear. Hours earlier they had hunted defenseless merchant ships with confidence. Now they were prey trapped beneath freezing water. Far away in Liverpool, Captain Gilbert Roberts stood above the giant WATU floor map while WRENS moved ship models carefully through another reconstructed convoy battle. The room remained quiet except for chalk scratching against boards and the movement of wooden models across linoleum. No gunfire. No explosions. No Atlantic storms. Yet decisions made inside this room now shaped the outcome of the longest battle of the war. Roberts understood something many officers never fully accepted. War was not won only by bravery or firepower. Sometimes it was won by understanding how the enemy thought. By late 1943 the balance of the Atlantic War had changed completely. New radar systems, long-range patrol aircraft, improved escort coordination, intelligence breakthroughs, and WATU tactics combined into something Germany could no longer overcome. The Wolfpack still attacked convoys, but every patrol now carried growing fear. U-boat crews realized the Atlantic was becoming a graveyard. Losses mounted relentlessly. Experienced commanders disappeared beneath the ocean faster than Germany could replace them. Newly trained crews entered combat with less experience against Allied escorts that improved constantly every month. For merchant sailors like Thomas Hargreaves, the difference became noticeable slowly. Convoys still faced danger. Ships still burned. Men still drowned in freezing black water. But something fundamental had changed. The escorts now fought with confidence instead of desperation. One winter night Thomas watched destroyers illuminate the sea around a convoy with star shells after a torpedo attack. Minutes later depth charges thundered across the Atlantic while sailors gathered silently along the freighter's rails listening. Oil surfaced by dawn. The convoy continued westward. For the first time in months, Thomas believed they might actually survive the crossing. The Battle of the Atlantic lasted nearly the entire war. Tens of thousands of sailors died across freezing oceans far from headlines and famous battlefields. Many never saw the enemy that killed them. And yet part of the battle's turning point began not aboard a battleship or submarine, but inside a room in Liverpool where officers, analysts, and young women with plotting sticks questioned an assumption everyone else accepted. The British had spent months searching outward into darkness for submarines already hiding inside the convoy itself. Once they understood that truth, the Atlantic changed forever. May 1943 changed the Atlantic forever. For nearly 4 years German submarines had hunted Allied convoys across the ocean with terrifying efficiency. Tankers burned through the night. Cargo ships vanished beneath freezing waves. Entire crews disappeared into black water before rescue ships could even reach them. Now the balance shifted. Convoys no longer reacted with confusion after attacks. Escort destroyers moved immediately using WATU doctrine drilled into them through endless exercises at Derby House. Searchlights and star shells illuminated submarines caught between merchant columns. Escorts attacked inward instead of outward. U-boats suddenly found themselves trapped inside the very formations they once treated like hunting grounds. The Atlantic became deadly for submarines. In convoy battles during May, destroyers coordinated attacks with almost mechanical precision. One escort forced submarines underwater while another moved to cut off escape routes. Radar improved. Air coverage expanded farther into the ocean. Escort carriers arrived alongside convoys carrying aircraft that hunted submarines day and night. German crews felt the difference instantly. Veteran captains who had survived dozens of patrols stopped speaking confidently about victory. Reports sent back to headquarters described oceans filled with aircraft, escorts reacting too quickly, attacks failing before torpedoes even struck. The wolf packs were bleeding to death. 41 German submarines were destroyed in a single month. Entire crews vanished with them. Inside German naval headquarters Admiral Karl Donitz studied casualty numbers with growing disbelief. Training replacements took months. Experienced commanders could not be replaced at all. Every submarine lost represented years of preparation sinking into cold water. The campaign that once threatened to starve Britain now threatened to destroy Germany's submarine arm instead. Donitz gave the month a name that spread through surviving U-boat crews like a funeral prayer. Black May. On May 24, 1943, he made the decision he had resisted for months. The wolf packs would withdraw from the North Atlantic. The hunters were retreating. And for the first time since the war began, Britain could breathe again. U-584, Final Patrol. Matrosenfreiter Lucas Weber sat in darkness wearing headphones that smelled faintly of sweat and machine oil. Around him the submarine creaked softly under pressure while red emergency lights painted the compartment in dim blood-colored shadows. He listened to the ocean. For months he had learned to recognize every sound beneath the Atlantic. Merchant propellers moved slowly and unevenly. Destroyers carried sharper rhythms. Convoys sounded like distant storms made of machinery and steel. Tonight something felt wrong. The escort ships were too close. Lucas adjusted the hydrophone controls carefully, isolating individual propeller signatures through layers of static and ocean noise. One destroyer moved across the convoy's front. Another accelerated along the port side. A third circled behind them. Coordinated. Deliberate. As if the escorts already knew exactly where the submarine was hiding. The captain whispered orders through the control room. Silent running. Diesel engines shut down. Electric motors took over. Inside the submarine every sound suddenly became dangerous. Men stopped speaking. Tools were set down carefully by hand. Even breathing seemed too loud. Lucas listened again. The destroyers kept closing. That was new. In earlier patrols, escorts usually charged outward after attacks, hunting empty darkness while submarines slipped quietly between merchant columns. But now the British attacked immediately and accurately. No hesitation. No confusion. The captain looked toward Lucas. Distance? Very close, Lucas answered quietly. Then came the first depth charges. The explosion struck through water with terrifying force. The submarine lurched violently sideways. Dust burst from pipes overhead. Light bulbs shattered across the compartment floor. Another explosion followed. Closer. Steel groaned around them. Lucas gripped the edge of his station as pressure waves hammered the hull again and again. Somewhere forward a man screamed. The sound stopped abruptly after the next detonation. The captain ordered deeper depth. The submarine angled downward. Water pressure increased against the hull with slow crushing force. Bolts creaked. Condensation dripped from overhead pipes like cold sweat. Then another string of explosions detonated directly above them. The lights went out. For several seconds the submarine existed only as noise and terror in complete darkness. Lucas understood the truth then. The Atlantic had changed sides. The British were no longer reacting blindly. They were hunting with understanding now. And somewhere far away in Liverpool, in a room covered with chalk lines and wooden ship models, strangers who had never entered a submarine had quietly learned how to kill them.